My name is Sheldon. I'm 73 years old. I was born September 14th, 1945, 14 days after World War II ended, in Brooklyn, New York. I've lived in New York most of my life, and after I retired from work in 1995, I moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. I lived there for 14 years. Then I moved to Oceanside, California, where I currently reside. I had lots of friends when I was a child. This was growing up in Brooklyn. Lots of friends and did all kinds of things in school. I still have one very close friend from that time. And, my friend is, it's about 60 years ago. He's still my best friend. He lives here in California with me. His name is Harold. And we've been best friends ever since. PS 182 was my elementary school. Then I went to junior high school 149. Then I went to Thomas Jefferson High School. And I went to Long Island University in Brooklyn. And when I was in the 7th grade, I skipped a grade. I went in the 7th and 9th grade. I was pretty smart in those days. Unfortunately, I'm not that smart now, but I was in those days. When I was young, we played ball in the street. The big thing was to play stickball down on our street. We had a stick. We used to steal the stick from my mother's broom. That was our baseball, our bat. And we used to hit a Spalding ball. The furthest you can usually hit it was about 2 sewers out, which was a couple of 100 feet. And that was like a home run. And we did that for many years. We played ball in the street. Of course, we played basketball and football and lots of other things. The normal games that kids played in a city. Grandparents were Orthodox Jews. My parents were Jewish by culture, but not very religious. We're not really into it. And I was really never into it. I consider myself a decent human being, but I'm not a religious person. Growing up, I had lots of girlfriends. My first girlfriend was named Sandy. I was about 17, she was about 15, and we were together for about 2 years. And eventually, for whatever the reason, we broke up. And I started dating other people after that. And about 4 or 5 years after that, I met my wife, Helene. We went together for a year, and we got married. And we had 3 children, Richard, Dawn, and Heather, who are now all adults and married, have their own families. And I'm a widower right now. My wife died about 19 years ago, so it's just me and my children. Came from Europe. They were not educated people. They worked in factories, and they didn't know very much about education. They thought anyone who wore a white shirt was an executive. If you wore a white shirt, you were the boss. People who didn't wear white shirts weren't the boss. So that's what my mother told me. She said, when you grow up, make sure you wear a white shirt. So of course I never wore white shirts. I did everything else. I had a reasonably successful career. I worked in New York City for 23 years, and I retired from my job there with the Transit Authority. I was a manager there. And that's when I left New York. One job for 23 years was with the New York City Transit Authority. I started out as a train conductor, and I worked my way up to a tower operator, an assistant dispatcher, a dispatcher, and I was a manager when I retired. I was there 23 years. It was fun. I had a good time there, and made a lot of friends. And I retired in 1995, and I was very fortunate that when I worked there, I was on a retirement plan that was probably the best plan they ever created, because it was a non-contributory plan, which is non-existent today. And I retired. The plan was a 20-50 plan, 20 years of service, age 50, and you got a pension. And that's what I did. I retired when I was 49 and a half, and the day I turned 50, my pension started. And I've been collecting ever since. In fact, I've been retired longer now than I worked there. So I think I beat the system. Now, I grew up in the 1950s. And I remember we got our first TV set when I was about 5 years old in 1950. It was a little black and white set about yo big, and in a gigantic box. And the whole family used to sit around looking at this tiny little screen in the big box. And there were only a few shows on TV at the time because it was the start of television. I remember watching Milton Berle. They called him Uncle Milty. He was Mr. Tuesday Night. And this was what everybody used to watch, and we watched the Ed Sullivan Show and Jackie Gleason. These were the early show, and I Love Lucy. Everybody loved Lucy. This was in the early 1950s. I remember getting our first telephone early in the 1950s, and I remember when color TV came out about 5 or 10 years later. It was really exciting, and things have changed so much. When I grew up, it was before computers. We didn't even have the calculators. When we were learning in school, you had to memorize how to multiply and divide, and that's how we did it in those days. We didn't have computers and calculators to show us how to do everything with the touch of a button. So people who grew up in my day were a lot sharper with numbers and things like that because you had to learn it. It wasn't done by machines. Religion. I consider myself an American. That's how I grew up. I love my country. I think that's how it should be. I'm not happy with the way things are today because it's very politicized, very divided. People are very extremist, either liberal or conservative, and I think it's very detrimental to the good of the American people. And I'm not happy with the government today. I wish we would get back to a more moderate place where everyone was treated fairly and equally. My parents were Orthodox Jews. My parents were Jewish by culture, but not very religious. We're not really into it. And I was really never into it. I consider myself a decent human being, but I'm not a religious person. Most of my vacations didn't start until I was pretty grown up already, because we didn't have a lot when I was a kid. We lived in a working class neighborhood and didn't have that much. I used to go on lots and lots of cruises. My wife and I used to love going on cruises. Vacations have been all around the country. I've been to Hawaii. I took a cruise in the Mediterranean, which was very nice. I went to France and Spain, Italy. My favorite place in Italy was Pompeii, where Mount Vesuvius exploded in 79 AD, and I was able to see what the ancient city looked like 2,000 years ago. And it was half excavated, it is to this very day, and it was a lot of fun to walk around there. It was very historical. I also went to Rome. I saw the Colosseum and the Vatican and the Trevi Fountain, which I thought was very beautiful. And I think my favorite trip was the one I took last year. I went to France. I met my daughter in Paris. She was working there at the time. And we toured all the sights to see in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, the Napoleon's tomb, the Louvre Museum, so many things. Everything to see in Paris we saw. It was a lot of fun. You watched this interview. I want to thank you for taking your time to watch it. I told you a little about myself. I don't think I'm anyone spectacular. I think I'm an average guy who lived a good life in America, and I'm very happy for the way things went in my life. I have 3 grown children, 6 grandchildren, and life is good. Enjoy it. This is my twin brother, Snuffy. And Snuffy. I consider him to be my son. He thinks he's a wolf. He weighs about 8 pounds, and he loves me to death. He knows who his daddy is, he knows where his bread is buttered, and he lives on my lap, and he sleeps in my armpit. He's the friendliest, sweetest, most loving little dog in the world. He loves everybody, and everybody loves Snuffy. I recently found out, I looked on the internet, that the life expectancy for a man in America is 72.9 years. I'm right now 73 years and 1 month. So I'm 4 months past my expiration date. So if I were a can of vegetables on the shelf, you probably would have thrown me out already. Because when it reaches the expiration date, you throw it out. But I intend to keep going for another 100 years or so. For as long as I can. I'm pretty healthy, pretty strong, and I love life, and I want to keep going as long as I can.